Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. Protests are sweeping France. France has been rocked by a wave of protests after a 17-year-old youth was shot by police near Paris this past Tuesday, sparking a ban on demonstrations in some cities, travel warnings, and reigniting a debate on over-policing in marginalized communities. What are we to make of all of this? Well, for insight, let's turn to our first guest. It's Friday, so we're going to start the show the way we always do. Our guest is an independent journalist, political analyst, and reporter for RT, Caleb Maupin. As always, Caleb, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here as always.
So scenes have merged of people setting fires to vehicles and climbing onto buildings with smashed windows while riot police officers fiercely clashed with demonstrators. You know, Caleb, it's ironic that the United States figured by trying to crash the Russian economy that these would be scenes coming from Moscow. But instead, these are scenes coming from France. Caleb Maupin.
Well, I've got a number of thoughts. The first thing that comes to my mind is the classic song by the Rolling Stones, Street Fighting Man. They say, summer's here and the time is right for fighting in the street, boys. And that kind of refers to the fact that, heat does, intensify things. But if you add to that there is an increasing amount of not unemployment, but underemployment. And this isn't just in France, but it's all over the Western capitalist world, especially since the pandemic. There's a lot of people who they may have a job, so to speak. They may have a gig that they survive, whether it's driving Uber or doing some kind of online graphic design or something like that. They may have a gig here or there, but they don't really have much going on. And they don't really have much of an economic future. And they're living with the stress of trying to survive in the gig economy. They're kind of locked out. And in addition to not having, a stable income and being, very anxious about putting their bills together, maybe paying their rent every month, in addition to that, they've got a lot of free time on their hands. And summer is here, and an incident like this incident of horrendous police brutality happens, and people are out in the streets. Now, this is France. And the other thing to keep in mind is that France, in their culture, they have much more of a tradition of respecting social unrest. The French Revolution, we can all remember, quite an episode of rioting and chaos, the storming of the Bastille, et cetera. That's a part of their national identity. And throughout France's history, there has been an admiration and kind of a respect for people going out and rioting in the streets and fighting the police, and that France, the country that has a very large, even today, a very large communist party. The trade unions are known for their militancy. We saw what happened with the Yellow Vest movement, et cetera. So in France, there's kind of less of a stigma on this kind of thing. And that's why we see episodes of unrest like this in France more frequently, because there's kind of a feeling among the population that this is an acceptable thing for one to do. But that also adds to the fact that you've had a recent inflow of migrants, refugees, and people from countries that are formerly colonized by France. You have an increasing amount of tension between, the folks that have been in France for many generations and folks that have recently migrated. There is a racial component to all of this. And so all of this is kind of a cauldron that has given birth to the situation that we're in now. But as you alluded to in your question, you can't get away from the economics and the economic constraints and the screws that have been tightened because of the tension with Russia and the result of these horrendous sanctions and what it has done to the French economy and the economy of many countries of the European Union. You can't ignore that as well. But the issue at hand is over policing, and it appears that this incident has taken place. An act of police brutality happened, and millions of people in France are angry about it and have decided to go out in the streets and make their feelings heard.
James Callahan's famous quote, "The sky turned black with the flapping wings of chickens coming home to roost." Imperialism. When you look at I think it's called Nanterre, when you look at that community, it's poor, it's people of color, it's people, as we discussed, Algeria, Morocco, wherever, right? Africa, West Africa, people who, as a result of imperialism, they had their countries looted, they had their gold stolen. I saw a video where these people were going into an Apple store and grabbing the iPhones and running, and I thought, well, everything in that iPhone was looted from Africa. A lot of the important parts, maybe they're just saying we want our stuff back. I mean, I'm saying that to be facetious, but you get my point. Imperialism has created these poor migrant neighborhoods with people that don't even have the same rights as other French citizens. And so the chickens of imperialism are coming home to roost. What do you think, Caleb?
I think you're absolutely right. And that, France in particular has a policy of not being so nice to immigrant communities. Many of these immigrants are Muslim. We saw how France, before the pandemic and before the masks, there was kind of a stigma on women wearing headscarves, and they were outlawing that. And there was kind of a stigma against these Muslim communities. And we see that history. And you add to that the fact that the reason many of these refugees and migrants are there is because they couldn't live in their own country because of economic development being held back by the Western global financial system. When I talk about imperialism, I'm talking about a system. I'm talking about an economic order. Lenin wrote a book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. It's the world being dominated by big banks and corporations based in the Western countries that hold back economic development and keep countries around the world in poverty so they can enrich themselves. And I think that around the world, countries are in revolt against that system. And I think that, in the streets of France, we're seeing people that are also outraged by that system and its results.
And to your point, we can compare and contrast a lot of the circumstances that are taking place that you just articulated in France, as in the elite are squeezing the working class. The economy is squeezing the working class. We can compare and contrast a lot of the pressures that are happening in France to what's happening in the United States. And we can also then compare and contrast the response. We have this rioting or this revolting in France to a police shooting of an African citizen. Of an immigrant in Africa. We have that same thing plaguing the society here in the United States.
I absolutely agree. And that as the economic situation gets worse, we're seeing an amping up of police power. In order to control the masses of people, there's much more surveillance than there used to be. Technology has certainly aided that process. People are seeing police more in their everyday lives, and they're feeling threatened by it in communities that have faced, historic injustice and marginalization at the police. That from the time of their childhood, they've had to deal with police in ways that other members of their society wouldn't have to. The resentment and the anger about that situation, and then seeing a blatant act of someone innocently shot down, that leads to a situation where people are ready to explode.
And, just a week ago, we were hearing that Russia's going to fall apart. Russia's weak. It's, the people are there. Well, they had an incident. Within 24 hours, that was dealt with. And I think it was because the government seems to be, in my opinion, much more aligned with the people. I think one of the things we're seeing, Caleb, if you could speak to this, is there's a lot of anger for a number of reasons in Europe, and most of it has to do with the fact that these neoliberal governments do not act on behalf of the electorate. And it was the yellow vest, then it was over the pension reforms, now it's this. I understand some of this is spread to Belgium now. There are other places. There's distrust. It's imperialism. It's neoliberal capitalism. All of these chickens seem to be coming home to roost at the same time. Caleb.
Sure. And there seems to be a broken line of communication. The Western governments don't seem responsive to the interests of their people. When the people are angry about something, the government doesn't seem concerned about it. And whatever you want to say about Russia or China or Venezuela or Iran or Nicaragua or People's Korea or the many anti-imperialist countries around the world that exist, one thing about them is they wouldn't be in power for 2 seconds if it wasn't for community organization. That on a local level, it's the Basij councils you've got in Iran, the Citizens Power Councils of Nicaragua, these kind of local community organizations, the Chinese Communist Party that's got 90 million members all over the country, that these governments are much more in touch with what their people want and much more able to respond to what their people want and able to deliver when the people are in motion. And the Western governments seem completely cut off. We have a situation here where Biden is wildly unpopular, but it looks like he may be the next president of the United States, even though he's polling very low. We've got a political situation where the Democratic Party isn't even going to have a primary, and where the other candidate, Trump, may be in jail as being indicted with federal charges to keep him off the ballot. So this wildly unpopular president, Joe Biden, may be the next president. That's a situation where the desires of the people are just completely cut off. The government seems unconcerned with the frustration and anger of the population. We have a situation where the population here is more anti-war than it's ever been. The people here say they're tired of these wars. They don't benefit the country. They're worried about the economic situation at home. But yet our government is continuing to escalate its interventions around the world and sending more troops to different countries. And at this point, that disconnect, when the government seems unresponsive to the feelings of the people, that can lead to explosive situations where the people make themselves heard through other means.
You just mentioned the political dynamics here with Biden and Trump, and we didn't send this to you, but there's I think an interesting story from yesterday. The Political Network, established by Charles and David Koch, have raised more than $70 million for political races, trying to help Republicans move past Trump. And one of the things that Charles Koch is saying is we need a president that's going to take us into the next chapter. And so, whereas we know that Donald Trump still has quite the following, but to find out now that one of the Koch brothers has raised $70 million, that's a very, very interesting development in the current political landscape.
Yeah, well, maybe they could, send $70 million to make chickens fly like eagles. Maybe they could spend $70 million to try to run faster than the speed of light. I mean, the Republican Party's been pretty thoroughly Trumpified. And so, they can throw a lot of money at that. But at the end of the day, your average Republican voter identifies with Trump and not with the neoconservative. The other thing to note is that, the Koch brothers, their father, Fred Koch, was a big, John Birch Society kind of guy. And they're really into Ayn Rand. They really like Ayn Rand and objectivism and this kind of like libertarian free market stuff. And that what they don't like about Donald Trump is that Donald Trump identifies as a populist. It's the people against the elites, and they don't like anything that smells like that. And they have been key in moving the Republican Party to the right on economic issues, pushing neoliberal economics. But they don't particularly like the wave of populism that they hear in Donald Trump. And from what I understand, they were not supporters of Donald Trump in 2016. If I understand correctly, they were so threatened by Trump's populism, they said maybe Hillary Clinton was a better alternative. If I recall correctly,
yeah, you're right.
So the Koch brothers are an interesting pair, and they're trying to do something that I think is almost impossible right now because the Trumpification of the Republican Party seems thorough and pretty complete.
And if the Democrats and the neoliberal wing of the Republican Party is successful in getting Trump out of the 2024 election, they'll find out that their party, the electorate in the Republican Party, are really not into them. The electorate is looking at them in the Republican Party, and though there may be some ideological differences here, they feel the economic crush of neoliberalism. They don't like the mainstream of their party either. And if you could comment on this, and I think this is important, RFK Jr. was asked, if you lose, will you commit to support Biden? And he said, no. Basically, in a nutshell, no, I won't. At any rate, your thoughts on all of that?
Well, that explains why the Democratic Party is not treating him as a real candidate, why they're not going to have any debates. It seems like the Democratic Party has this position that you must support whoever wins. You must vote blue no matter who in order to be treated as a real candidate in the elections. And RFK Jr. has said that he's not going to do that. Now, I've noticed that I continue to see articles claiming that RFK Jr. is, quote, right-wing. And I have to ask myself, what does right wing mean? I mean, this is a guy who is, he's the son of Robert Kennedy. He's the nephew of JFK. This is somebody who has been, spent most of his life as a climate change activist. I mean, that's really been the cause that he dedicated himself to the most over the years. But but he's also, got critical positions on vaccines. He's anti-war. He's very, very much, his whole identity, from the time he was a young man, with his father and has been associated with the civil rights movement, and he's very much a supporter of Black Lives Matter. And I just, I don't understand how he's right wing, but this is kind of the mainstream of the Democratic Party is starting to sound like the neocons did during the Bush years, right? You're either with them or against them. They called out the libertarians and the paleoconservatives. They said, oh, you're liberals, you're leftists. Well, they're not. Pat Buchanan's not a leftist. Alex Jones, Ron Paul, people like that are not leftists by any means. But during the Bush years, if you read, what David Horowitz and some of the neocons would say, they would refer to these people as left wing. Why? Well, they were against the Iraq War. They were sticking up for civil liberties. So they must be with Michael Moore. They must be leftist. They must love Fidel Castro. And that's kind of the way the dialogue is, that we have this main current that's dominating U.S. politics, the kind of, culturally woke but economically conservative and very hawkish wing of the Democratic Party. They are the mainstream of U.S. politics, and you're with them or against them. As George W. Bush said about his faction, you're with us or against us. And RFK is against them, so they call him right wing, even though that doesn't make any logical sense to me.
RT reports Ukrainian generals killed in Russian strike. Moscow had earlier reported hitting a temporary brigade base in the Donbas city of Kramatorsk, and 2 Ukrainian generals were killed in this precision strike. We were told when it happened on Tuesday that Russia had the missile had hit a pizzeria, and that there were women and children that were in there having dinner, and that this missile came out of nowhere. And now we find out, no, well, it wasn't quite just an innocent pizzeria. It may very well have been a temporary base housing the Ukrainian Armed Forces 56th Motorized Infantry Brigade, and that this location was found because the soldiers that were there were using social media to tweet their whereabouts, and that once Russia locked in on that, and through other social media sources, it kind of became a done deal. Caleb Maupin.
Yeah, that whole situation. First of all, we were lied to about it, right? We were told of another horror story of evil Russia killing some innocent civilians. And now the details come out, and now we find out about high-ranking members of the Ukrainian military being taken out. And now we also find out that the way Russia was able to precisely calculate their location was through incompetence, basically, that their own military people were using social media and advertising their location. All of this points to the fact that, are we expected to see, Ukraine was supposed to have this big counteroffensive. It was supposed to be glorious, and I don't think we can count on that happening anytime soon. And that leads me back to what I have continually said about this Ukraine thing, which is how much is enough? This is a huge money laundering operation at the end of the day. Billions of American tax dollars are flowing into Ukraine. And lots of money is being made for Ukrainian oligarchs, and lots of money is being made for defense contractors and military corporations, and lots of money is being made pushing Russia off the global economy and trying to, secure more of a monopoly for American oil companies and competition with Russia. How much more? How longer are they going to keep this going? What is the gain here? This just keeps going on and on and on. Ukrainians are dying, Russians are dying, and realists admit that the idea that they're going to just completely drive Russia out of all the territories Ukraine claims, Crimea, that all the Donbass, all just going to, at some point Russia will just hand it all back to Ukraine. That's not going to happen. So how much longer is this going to go on? And how many more people are going to die in this continued charade? And how much money do these people have to make? When are they going to say, all right, we've made enough money off this? There you go.
Yeah, and in looking at this, the issue being that this discussion of supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine or the terrible things that's happening in Ukraine, when we realized that they had a deal, the U.S. killed the deal. Now they're literally kidnapping Ukrainians, putting them in basically a casket that they call a Bradley and sending them out into a minefield. You know, how can you have a discussion about Ukrainians dying in battle and, oh, this is terrible that the Russians are attacking them, when the fact of the matter is there shouldn't be a battle right now because the Russians and the Ukrainians had worked out a deal in the past, and the U.S. Empire killed the deal. Caleb.
Indeed. I mean, how much longer are they going to keep this going? Because it's bad for the world economy. It's bad for the people of the European Union. It's bad for the economy of the United States. People are dying every day. I mean, this is just a criminal situation here, where they are determined to, make Russia lose money, to isolate Russia economically, and I mean, it's just absolutely sinister. I mean, this is some kind of demented Keynesianism. It's an economic stimulus for some of the richest people in the world, and it's hurting the rest of the global economy. It's a disaster.
I want to quickly go back to Joe Biden because NBC News has a poll that they say 68% of voters have worries about Biden's mental and physical health. And they say that the good news is that he's leading Trump by 4 points in their poll, but that's within the margin of error, so you could call it a dead heat. But that 68% of voters say they have concerns about Biden having the necessary mental and physical health. And now you've got Biden making jokes about this. I'm wondering, in terms of NBC News picking up on this story and talking about people's concerns about Biden's mental capacity, do you get a sense that they're putting up trial balloons and that they're using these stories to prepare people for a change on the Democrat side?
And it could be possible that some on the Democrat side are thinking that we can't just do the Biden thing. I will say that probably the main reason that Biden is insisting on running again, and the main reason that it seems like the Democratic Party has been okay with that, is not about Joe Biden. It's about who will be his running mate, Kamala Harris, because she will never win an election in the United States. Right? As the candidate, she would lose every time. She got less than 1% of the vote when she ran, in the Democratic primary. And the only way she could ever become president is by having Joe Biden get reelected and then retire, step down, or God forbid, have some kind of health issue or something like that. And that's the only way she could ever be president. And that the Hillary Clinton State Department, the forces that were behind it, they made a decision to make her the one that they are rallying behind. And you think about academics like Anne Marie Slaughter, who worked at the State Department under Hillary Clinton, and Jared Andrew Cohen, who kind of engineered the Arab Spring and, coordinated with Twitter to manipulate the Arab Spring to serve U.S. ends, and everything that happened during the first administration of Barack Obama when Hillary Clinton was running the State Department. Those forces have decided they want Kamala Harris in the presidency, and they are determined to make it happen, even though the American people don't want it. And that's why I think that the Biden ticket, the Biden-Harris ticket in 2024 is something that certain forces won't abandon because they want to see a Kamala Harris presidency.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang went through a European tour about a week or so ago, and Europe's response seems to be quite clear. That is that the EU is not going to decouple from China. Apparently, they've got a document that they're going to be writing, and in the document, they're going to put down two things. Number one, the draft document reads that Europe does not intend to decouple or turn inwards or adopt policies to harm China nor to thwart China's economic progress and development. China is working with the EU. They're making money. The EU is making money. The U.S. empire is doing everything they can to take out China. And it looks like the Europeans are going to push back on this one. Your thoughts?
And let's add two other points to that quickly. When Macron went to China, he took a plane load of businessmen with him. When Schultz went to China, he took a plane load of businessmen with him. And we also see now that, everybody understands the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which indicates that the United States is doing its best to deindustrialize Germany. The French might be getting wind that there's something afoul in the breeze, Caleb?
Sure. Well, it's apparent that when it comes to the divide in the United States between who do we go after, Russia or China, the faction in the United States that's closer to Europe, that's, the Biden, Obama, Brzezinski, that crowd, the Eastern establishment, they talk about them, big oil, the Rockefeller think tank, Silicon Valley, they focus on going after Russia. And there's a couple reasons for that, which is that Russia is a major oil and gas exporting country, and this is the oil and gas companies that see them as a competitor. It's also because, this is the Silicon Valley folks, and Russia is on the internet. They got Twitter and Facebook and all of that, and they're the ones that are trying to combat, Russia and its role on the internet and putting out anti-imperialist messages and such. And that they focus on going after Russia, whereas it's more of...
Well, wait a minute. And Brzezinski has hated Russia his entire life, and he is the ideological father of many of the people that you've just mentioned.
Indeed. I mean, out of Columbia University, Brzezinski is of Polish descent and hated Russians on an ethnic basis as a Roman Catholic Pole, and there's a long-standing ethnic stuff going on there. And that's Brzezinski and the liberals' kind of school of foreign policy. That's their focus. Whereas it's more the industrial sector, the manufacturers that don't like China because China produces so much. They make so much steel. They make so much telecommunications technology. And we know that Tim Cook of Apple, even though Apple was against Donald Trump and made many statements opposing Trump, Tim Cook of Apple was going to the White House and meeting with Donald Trump and pushing him to put sanctions on Huawei technologies. And that there are divisions. Now, at the end of the day, Western American corporations would like to dominate the world economy, and they see both Russia and China as competitors. But among the Democrats, the Eastern establishment, the CIA, the Silicon Valley, the liberals, their focus has been on kind of opposing Russia, whereas the manufacturers, people like the Koch brothers, their focus has been on opposing China, and that Silicon Valley would like China to get online. They'd like Facebook and Twitter and all that to get into China. They see China as an untapped market, not as a competitor or not as someone they're trying to control and regulate. So there's a little bit of a difference, kind of a division of labor there. And one thing that China has really done to protect itself is this talk of decoupling. China has embedded itself in the economies of many countries around the world, including the United States, but especially European Union countries. And that this decoupling or this, cutting off with China comes at great economic cost to many countries around the world. And the United States has recently, they rolled out the red carpet for Modi of India. They just rolled out the red carpet for him. And that was all about putting pressure on him to essentially join them in escalating with China, emphasizing border disputes, et cetera. And that China has such an impact on the economies of many countries around the world. The United States can increase its hostility to China, but doing so is going to come at great cost to many U.S. allies, and I would argue even to the United States itself.
And the other thing is, Caleb, I think China was known for cheap goods, but now China's known for highly advanced technological goods, high quality technological goods at a reasonable price. It's not just cheap plastic things for the dollar store anymore.
And they're making automobiles that are being sold in Russia.
How about that? About a minute and a half left, Caleb.
Sure. Well, China has done a lot to invest in its population and educate its population. And they have engineers, they have scientists, they have a lot of people that are being churned out of their universities with real skills to invest in high technology, to advance in the computer revolution with artificial intelligence. We're not doing that in the United States. We have not decided to invest in our population in that way. And as a result, China is very much at the center of many of the great advances that are happening in the technological world. And that is going to force many countries to do business with them because they have the brain power that we in the West have decided we don't want to invest in having.
And to that point, as we get out, the Supreme Court has decided that student loan forgiveness the president can't do. And the Supreme Court also decided that diversity in institutions of higher education cannot be that race cannot be an element in those determinations, making it harder for people of color to get educated and the poor to get educated. So you're right. the United States isn't investing in the education of its population. Caleb Maupin, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis. Thank you for your flexibility, and we look forward to having you back.
Absolutely. It is always a pleasure to engage with both of you.
Thanks, man. Folks, you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Lee, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.